You've got a very interesting stat, I hear.
I just learned this today, that it was actually after this storm they made some readjustments, and that's actually what started Siesta Key and Sarasota. Sarasota was just a fishing village at that point, but then they ended up shifting to trying to recuperate the area as more of a resort town, and then that's how it came out to be.
Wow.
So I guess that there can always be that sunshine that follows rain, and the sunshine for Tampa literally could be out by tomorrow afternoon once this moves by. But we've been so focused when we say the Tampa area, but it's kind of like Charlotte. We say the Charlotte area, but that could also include Statesville and Hickory. Sarasota is very much in that. And the reason why I'm focusing in on Sarasota, we never go by just the center line. That's why we removed it from all of our forecast cones, because people are like, oh, I'm not on the line, I'm not affected. No, anyone in this cone is going to see the worst of the conditions, and it's always south of the eye wall that's going to have the worst storm surge. The reason why I'm showing you this map is these are the most historical tracks to move through the Tampa area. This is the one that we just talked about, that Ben was mentioning, 1921. It was on the northern side of Tampa. That allowed for the worst storm surge to come into the bay. Now, if the track is more centered right here, we're going to see the worst storm surge come right around Sarasota. It could be a little bit further north. Really, anyone in this cone could have that landfall. So anyone from Tampa down, I would say, around Port Charlotte really has to watch out for seeing the worst of the conditions with this. So I want to show you exactly what some of our storm surge estimate. This is a new product that's been developed over the last couple of years, showing the low-lying areas, what happens in these type of situations. So St. Petersburg has really come up. This was all in the red, meaning up to about a 12-foot storm surge. Now we're seeing it a little bit more on the eastern side of the bay, affecting Ruskin and then Bradenton a little bit more harder hit. This is the harrowing part. Siesta Key, right here around Sarasota, is going to be in direct line for, I think, just swells up to 12 to 15 feet. And this area doesn't usually get a direct hit like this. So this could be definitely the worst storm that they've had in their history. And as I mentioned, back in 1921, where we have any comparison, barely anyone lived through here, so we don't really have an estimate as far as damage, but it still caused $150,000 in damage to a lot of the ships. Now, the storm surge is actually going to be outside of the cone. That's why you got to kind of ignore this. It's not necessarily all within this. You're going to have impacts up and down the state of Florida, where you could still have up to that 12-foot storm surge into Port Charlotte and around Fort Myers that got slammed a couple years ago by Ian. You're going to have some impacts here as well. Here is the most recent image of Hurricane Milton. I zoomed in a little bit. This is actually a 3D image. One thing that we're seeing a change, you don't have the eye wall. This is still going through its eye wall circulation, so it's replacing it right now, but that's allowing it to weaken slightly, but it's actually going to continue to weaken as it gets a little bit closer to the shoreline. What's not weakening are the outer bands. These outer bands are producing some significant supercells. We now can quick count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tornado warnings across the state of Florida. So areas that are going to be impacted by storm surge around Fort Myers, well, you're getting tornado warnings in the meantime. The most recent track shows that about 8 p.m., we're going to see the center of circulation anywhere from 45 to 75 miles offshore. So I think it's really between that time, 8 p.m. to about 2 a.m., that we're going to have a landfall somewhere in this cone, and it's going to be narrowed, and we're going to have a better judgment of this over the next, I would say, 3 to 6 hours. But at that point, you're going to have impacts up and down the state, as I mentioned. It's still going to be a Category 1 crossing the state by 8 a.m., and then it's going to be out of Florida's hair by the evening. Up to 10 inches of rain is possible. I already mentioned the storm surge. The good news is it's cruising through. If this was a slow mover, that rain total would be doubled. But the one thing that's also going to happen, that wind field is going to spread out, then it dissipates, turning to a tropical storm. Active hurricane warnings are in place, but also the Carolinas, it's the shoreline, the actual waters of South Carolina under a tropical storm warning, meaning, hey, don't go out in the boat. Our impact? Clouds. Literally, you might see some clouds increase later today, tonight, but then look, those leave us, another front moves through, we cool down, and then we have more of that fall weather. We can actually already see the clouds, so that's the impacts. It's just wedging all that cloud cover that was already over Florida. 75 degrees today, 69 degrees for Boone. A cool evening, down to 61 with that increasing cloud cover. Lows in the 40s most of those mornings, but look at that, next week, 40 degrees, the lower 40s, that's going to be a big chill, even a chance of the upper 20s for the mountains, and that's also not a good situation for them. Rainfall chances very, very low, at most a 20% chance over the next 10 days. Guy Roofing 7-day forecast, no problems on the forecast. I think we're staying dry in the meantime.